Okay. And beforehand, so club business. On June 6th, we're going to be having our next City Star Party. But this one's going to be unique. Before this, around 6:30, we're going to have a swap meet out in the parking lot here. So if you need some more astronomy equipment or just have way too much and need to give it to somebody else, just bring it here, set up. We're going to try to have tables out there, some electricity, try to get some snacks up there. And it's a good way to, A, socialize, meet new people, B, get good equipment, and then C, right afterwards we'll kick right into the Star Party. And hopefully the weather is good with us, but last time it wasn't very nice. But if it's all goes well, then we'll have a nice viewing that night as well. So we have that. Other new things, Friday, 2 days, there's a brand new meteor shower. So it'll be the first time we'll be able to see it, so nobody knows what it's going to be like. I believe it's from that comet that went through that blew up by the sun. So we're going to be going through.
It's a different comet.
It's a different one?
It's one that just flew by Jupiter, and Jupiter gave it a tug and threw it in our path.
Okay.
And we expect to see it every year from now on. We're saying anywhere from 1 to 200 up to 1,000 meters per hour. So, and the radian for that is going to be right around the North Pole, just a little bit lower than the North Pole. I mean the North Celestial Polaris. And they're going to be coming at us, not streaking across like that. So it's all going to be an area like that. And so you might see your first, if you've never seen a point meteor, you'll probably have a good chance to see one on this one because they're frequent and they're coming closer toward us than traversing across our path.
Friday night.
Friday night.
And they're slow moving. They're slow moving. That's all. They're slow.
So this will be. It should be peaking Friday night, but like I said, it's the first year. It could be amazing. It could be a total letdown. But either way, you should go out and at least look up. And
Give the website.
the website is meteor.seti.org. Meteor.seti.org. They have a lot more information there. Feel free to look it up. I'll put it on our website tonight. So you should be able to go to the SFA website and see it as well.
Be careful for the fog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could ruin everything.
Oh yeah. Over the weekend, or over last weekend, we were at Maker's Fair, and we got a what's the
First place in our class.
yeah first place in our class. So yeah, probably to this gentleman and to Doug, who ran the booth both days. I helped half a day, got a nice little something. But they were showing their telescopes. Everyone loved their, especially his scope. If you haven't seen his scope, he calls himself an amateur woodworker as well, but that's pretty professional stuff, I saw it.
What was your class?
We didn't figure that out.
Yes.
So we don't know if we were the only one or we got a ribbon.
But we did get a ribbon. And this is the first time we've received anything from Maker's Fair other than a lot of interest. So a lot of people really liked what we did, and so I don't see any new faces here. Do we have any new faces? Yeah. So how'd you guys find out about us?
Excuse my mother.
Okay.
Your website through the Academy of Sciences.
Oh, nice. Okay.
It's on the variousscience.org/calendar.
Okay. Well, normally we have the nice auditorium upstairs, bigger screen, but that's not going to decrease the quality of the lecture. It's going to be amazing.
Members Night on Mount Cam this Saturday.
Yes.
Public Night the following Saturday. Come on up.
So if you're a member, come up this weekend. If you're not a member, join. You have to be a member to be up there because of insurance rules. Yeah, it's a special deal we have with the mountain. But come up next weekend for another lecture given by the Mount Tam, or Friends of Mount Tam, and then we'll be doing our star party as usual. So, anything else to the club before we head it off?
Laser star party? Laser point star party? I saw
So-
it announced.
Yeah, Yosemite, he said he's going to work on the spreadsheet this weekend, so hopefully next week we'll know. We'll send out information as soon as it's known. But that's all I have. We'll pass it on to Linda. You ready?
Star party going to be after the swap?
It'll be in the parking lot here. So last month we did it here as well. So this will be the second time we have it at the Randall.
I'm going to pass this around to you. You've all seen it, know it, and love it. The research request. ND Traders, I said next month, but we have some of that open. If anybody's in the mood to sign it, thank you so much.
You had a question here.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to announce that tonight at 4 minutes past 10, there would be a very bright iridium flare.
Oh,
It
nice.
would be 30 degrees above the northeast, and it should be many times brighter than Venus. But it only lasts for about 2 or 3 seconds.
What's that?
At 2240, that's 1040.
10:40.
And what was it?
And which direction?
Yeah, 30 degrees above the northeast.
If you want to do it.
So that was just a
I
special
got
one.
Yeah. Get the app for the phone if you don't have that.
Oh, yeah.
You can see
Oh, I
it.
just like one.
There's like a dozen already.
I have like Great Sky.
So there's nothing else to do.
Volunteers go.
I'll turn off the lights.
Tonight we're happy to have a return lecture by Faride Khalaf, who is here for the second time. I think he was here about 2 years ago, and his wife Kathleen is also joining him tonight. He grew up in the Bay Area, and he was interested in astronomy as a very young person, so whenever you show the sky to a young person, it might be so important to them to consider a life in science, and that happened to him. He's had many, many, many years with the telescope. He began his aviation career as a skydiver in '82. He's been a private pilot for 25 years. He was a general aircraft mechanic at United Airlines for 10 years. And during 2 of those years, he was a mechanic instructor teaching structural repairs, and also was a fuel system specialist. In addition to being the amateur astronomer that he is, he's a certified telescope operator at the Chabot Space and Science Center, where he gives talks often. And he gives talks to other groups on other related topics throughout the Bay Area. So we'll have him back another time. Tonight, I'm really excited about his talk called TheDustyDozen. America and NASA did the impossible when JFK said we're going to go to the moon, and a dozen American astronauts would become humanity's first ambassador to Luna. He's going to talk about people, the Dusty Dozen, the lucky men who risked so much for the reward of skipping across the dusty surface of the moon. And he will look at the 6 Apollo lunar missions and meet the gallant astronauts and command module pilots who brought their insights into what is the most awesome adventure and accomplishment of humankind. Join me in welcoming Faride Khalaf.
That works for me. Is that okay with everyone? Well, thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed being here before, and I was astounded at the enthusiasm among you in your astronomy group, and it's always nice to revisit that. So thanks for having me again. You can see from this picture, I'll just go right into it, and what I'm going to do is try to go through it as quickly as I can, and then we'll do questions and answers at the end, because I've got a lot of things to talk about here. Before I start, I am a telescope operator at Chabot Space and Science Center. I do this as a volunteer. If anyone would like to be a volunteer there, it's extremely rewarding. I get to work with an 8-inch refractor that was built 130 years ago. It's called LEA, and these are in really nice state-of-the-art observatory domes. Our 20-inch refractor is Rachel, who will be 100 years old this year. And so, even if you don't want to operate these, come and take a look through them. It's free to the public. If you've never been there, anybody been there before? Yeah. Right. It is free on Friday nights and Saturday nights. Just make sure you check the weather. Humidity, anytime it approaches 90%, we shut down. So careful of that. Even if the weather forecast is good, if you see a fog rolling in with an incoming tide that brings all that chill with it, and it condenses the fog and then it blows over the top, we get socked over there. So you might want to give us a phone call before you roll out. And I have some material here if you're interested in what we're about there. So feel free to grab something here. Okay, that is an actual photograph of one of our astronauts on the moon. And you can see how dirty their garments got. So in this adventure, what we did is we crammed 3 very brave astronauts inside a capsule. And you can see on top of this 6.5 million pound rocket, which is 88% fuel. That weight, 88% of it is fuel. The rest of it is the rocket. So it's basically a sausage. If you think of the casing as the rocket and the meat that's in there as the fuel, that's what it is. It's a pretty amazing device. All of that is bus fare just to take these guys to the moon and back. It takes a lot of energy to do this. That's why the Saturn V was utilized. Because for the first half of the atmosphere, you're pushing through the thickest part of the atmosphere. Time is money, and you got to get through there quick because you're burning fuel. And so they don't just go up real nice and slow. If we could do it efficiently, we would. We would prefer that. But we have to push hard because you'll run out of fuel just hovering. So they go at supersonic speeds upward, and they produce a lot of heat on these capsules. So it's an uncomfortable ride on the ascent. So just in front of it is where the command module sits. And this is basically your backpack with all your food and consumables. And what it does is it gives you a propulsion system with plenty of fuel, and that'll bring you home. This is your Saturn V to bring you back. Why is that? Because it's downhill coming home. The gravity of the Earth brings you back. You don't need as much fuel. So the service module makes water, electricity. It also has reaction control rockets. That's where your rocket goes. Picture sheet. Somebody here showed me a picture of one of these rockets. They're about that big. It produces 100 pounds of thrust. There's 16 of them on this service module. And they use it for maneuvering, translation, and attitude changes when they're flying in space. So the idea is that 3 men ride inside the command module. There's a commander, a command module pilot, and a lunar module pilot. What they tried not to do is call the second guy in charge a co-pilot. Nobody wants to be a co-pilot. Everyone in their own right is a pilot. So they did away with calling the astronauts co-pilot. And the commander is actually the captain. They didn't want to use captain because they didn't want to get into, egos and clashes. So the commander actually is operating out of the pilot's seat on the ascent. He's taking the ship up there. The command module pilot moves into the left seat when these 2 guys go down to the moon. So he's really just basically keeping the escape vehicle, the getaway car, idling in orbit for these 2 bank robbers to come back with the loot, being the rocks, okay, if you want to think of it that way. The lunar module pilot, he's a lunar module pilot. Really, unfortunately, he doesn't really get to control the lunar module. He acts as co-pilot, and he looks out the window and calls out numbers. The commander also takes the lunar module down to the surface. This is why people like Gene Cernan, who were given an opportunity to fly on Apollo 15, turned it down because he would have flown as a lunar module pilot, which means you go for a ride, you don't get to operate it. And it's just a title, and that's all it is. he decided to hold out to go as a commander of a mission on a later mission. He was really lucky they didn't cut off the Apollo program at 17, or 16 rather. So, here they are. Commander on ascent from the launch pad sits here. Lunar module pilot sits in the middle. That would be Buzz Aldrin's seat on Apollo 11. And your command module pilot moves to this seat and sits in there and orbits in total solitude while the two men go down to the surface. And this is a picture taken from the lunar module of the command and service module, taken with a Hasselblad 500 EL camera, which was used for all of those photos. So, yeah. I thought maybe I could rewrite this and say, I am the luckiest man from Earth. Anyway. Who are these guys? Well, in the front row seated are the original Mercury 7 astronauts. There's Wally Schirra, Scott Carpenter, Gus Grissom, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton. So you can think of them as Group 1 astronauts. Nobody ever calls them Group 1. They call them the Mercury 7. Now, the people standing in the back are what they call the New 9, also known as Group 2 astronauts. And now we're up to, I don't know, 60 some of the class of astronauts that we have now. And of these astronauts, some of them got to go to the moon. Not all of them. Can you remember which ones? This guy got killed. That's Elliot C. He died in the movie The Right Stuff. The two pilots had crashed a jet, an F-104. They were practice flying, and they died. He's one of them. Well, let's just go ahead and show you. These four went to the moon. Now, all four of them also went as commanders. Okay. Of the New 9, 3 of them became commanders, and only from the Mercury mission, our very first man in space, American in space, Alan Shepard, got to go as commander for Apollo 14. So, and now, this is the Group 3 astronauts. Here's the sad thing. There should be a circle around this guy. Why is it missing? That's Jim Lovell, Apollo 13. He was supposed to make it onto the surface of the moon and be the commander of that mission. He went to the moon twice and never got to walk on it. He was commander of Apollo 13, so he got to orbit Apollo 13, kind of a 3/4 orbit, free return. Because of that wide orbit, he was with a crew that traveled the farthest from planet Earth. So he set a record with his crewmates. With him was this guy, Frank Borman. Frank Borman was the commander of Apollo 8, and Jim Lovell went with him, along with Bill Anders. But why did these two go on Apollo 8? Well, they worked out a mission on Gemini 7, where they had an endurance flight, which is a record that has not been broken to this day, sitting in a space capsule for 2 weeks. The body odor after day 8, you don't notice it anymore, but up until the 8th day, it's very cumbersome. And they made special spacesuits for that mission that have helmets that are this big. They look like the Sokol spacesuit that's used by the Russians on the Soyuz. It's a half helmet. It flips back like a hoodie because, you know, they're just sitting there for 2 weeks. They want to be able to scratch their nose. They have to be able to flip it back, but be able to pull it over in a hurry if they need it instead of hunting for it. And they have provisions to make it easy to slip on and off so they can go to the bathroom. These guys weren't eating much during that mission. What they were trying to do is reduce the need to go behind the bushes because in zero gravity it's a real difficult task. But after 9 days in orbit, Frank Borman looked to his partner, his number 1, and said, "Hey, Jim, I think it's time." That's all he said. And Jim knew exactly what he meant. He looked at him and said, "Oh, come on, Frank, we only have 5 days, can't it wait?" And Frank Borman said if it wasn't for Lovell's sense of humor, they would not have made it 2 weeks. They would have aborted. So they were the perfect crew to be on Apollo 8, the first to go to the moon. Not to land, just to do 10 orbits and return. Now, while they were in orbit, these two characters, Wally Schirra and Tom Stafford, went up on Gemini 6 and joined them and flew in formation around the Earth. And they played around up there for a couple of days and came back. And they were happy to come home, but these guys had to stay another 7 days. So these are some real tough people. Can you imagine being in a phone booth? Not a phone booth, but something like a smart car, even with your best friend. If you cloned yourself and sat in a smart car with your clone, you probably would kill each other. I think I'd go crazy. It's just amazing how disciplined they are. Now in the front row, Gus Grissom, along with Ed White, they unfortunately perished in the Apollo 1 launch pad fire. And from the Gemini mission, these two guys went up together on Gemini 4. And that's Jim McDivitt, Ed White. Ed White is the first American to do a spacewalk. And Gus Grissom was the first to go up with John Young, who is in the next group. John Young is, where are you, John? I don't see him. Well, he's in another group later on. But anyway, they went up and were the first ever in the history of human spaceflight to go up in a pair, as a pair in the same spacecraft. So Americans got that title. Now, out of the group 3 astronauts, these are the only ones that got to go to the moon and walk on the surface. There's Buzz Aldrin, that's Dave Scott, who was commander of Apollo 15. This is Gene Cernan, the last man to walk on the moon. And he also went twice to the moon. And his second trip was Apollo 17. His first trip was Apollo 10 with Dave Scott, as a matter of fact, this guy. Dave Scott was on that Apollo 10 mission, or was he? No, Tom Stafford. Tom Stafford, this guy. Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and the first scientist to go to the moon, into space, as a matter of fact. It was Jack Schmidt, or Harrison Schmidt, and he was a geologist. He's still alive, by the way. I met Gene Cernan, too. He's alive and well, and he's an amazing guy. He almost crushed my hand and dragged me behind his golf cart. Reached out and gave me a high five, but it was a hanging high five, and like one of these, like, okay, I'm glad you're glad to meet me, so it was really cool.
By the way, I have that magazine.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
I don't have that one, but I have some from around the time of my birth, actually older ones from the Mercury mission. That's the mission patch for the entire Apollo program. And these are the landing sites, and they're all on the Earth-facing side of the moon. And these landings happened at different phases, but they were all during lunar daylight. And you can see Apollo 11, 12, 13 missed it, so 14 landed where 13 was supposed to land. And these guys logged 22 kilometers traversed on the surface, as opposed to, I don't know how many hundred yards total from Apollo 11. So they just went ankle deep on the first ride. So let's start with Apollo 1. It's an important mission because they learned a lot from it. They learned that pure oxygen is dangerous, and they should have known that. That's a no-brainer. And they also redesigned the hatch so the hatch can be opened from the inside and it can blow out, much like an airplane door. Except airplane doors on airliners are designed so that you can't overcome, actually, They will open once the pressure is relieved, but they're plug doors. They have gates that close down and come in and then pop out again. So these are very different. That's what remains of the interior when they had 100% oxygen, and there was a spark, and the materials were flammable, of course. And they took that capsule to analyze what went wrong, and it still resides in a storage unit in Johnson Space Center. And of course, it's under guard while they're going through every part of it to see what they could learn from it. It was a very tragic time. We lost these three guys. Ed White from Gemini 4, he was the first spacewalker, and a rookie astronaut, Roger Chaffee, and our best bet to walk on the moon, Gus Grissom. Gus Grissom would have been Neil Armstrong had he survived. He would have been the first man to walk on the moon. He was engineering savvy, really smart, very disciplined Air Force guy. And now, if you can name these three, you know Rusty Schweikert?
I met him.
Apollo 9, yeah. I met him a couple of times.
He actually recognizes me.
Does he really?
Okay.
Wow.
Oh, he's a friend of Peter's Nesting.
You must be visible from the moon. Well, he didn't go to the moon.
No.
Yeah. So this is Jim McDivitt. Yeah, that's Jim McDivitt. He's a great, really smart guy. And Dave Scott. Well, these three were the backup crew for Apollo 1. So if something would have happened to the Apollo 1 crew where they couldn't perform their pad test, these guys would be the ones to die. And they kept a team together. You moved as a group. If one guy couldn't make it, then they bring the backup crew in. And those pad tests were not just for checking the equipment, they're also rehearsing. It's like a live rehearsal for all the ground crew, the booster teams, all of those people in the Mission Control Center. They have to go through a dry run. It's a dress rehearsal. So back to these three guys. This is the official NASA PR photograph. Are those genuine smiles or are they fake smiles? What do you think? This guy, and all three of them, they're smart people. These are not, they're not dumb. They're very highly educated, cream of the crop, very intelligent people. They know the dangers, and they're not happy with what they're facing. So they, after this publicity photo, they got one of their buddies to take a picture with a little Instamatic camera. That's what they got taken. And then they took this and gave it to Von Braun's rocket team and said, here, this is how we really feel. Forget the smiley picture. We're praying for our lives. Sadly, they paid with their lives because exactly what they were upset about was 100% pure oxygen. And that's what got them.
Yeah, it was a 3 atmospheres too.
3?
Yeah,
Really?
differential pressure. They
Wow.
needed.
So they were trying to check the hull pressure. With people in it? That's
yes.
crazy.
No wonder they're crying.
Don't tell me that. I don't need to know that.
So it blew up on the pad?
They didn't blow up. They had a command module fire that was contained inside the capsule. The rocket itself was not harmed. So now, what they learned from that is they had to redesign the hatch, reduce it to 60% oxygen, find out what went wrong, make sure that doesn't happen again, and slow down and think about what they're doing going forward. Had it not been for that sacrifice, the remaining astronauts, all of them believed that none of them would have made it to the moon because their carelessness would have manifested somewhere along the way. So they did not die in vain. The two, okay, we're looking at Apollo 7 here. So Apollo 7 did not ride on a Saturn V. This is Apollo 7 that launched in '68. The first time humans rode inside a North American aviation which is the company that built the command module, inside that 3-man Apollo capsule. So this was going to be a humanoid operated vehicle for the first time. So there goes Apollo 7. This was taken from an Orion spacecraft. Orion is an acronym for Apollo Instrumented Range Aircraft. And there were 8 of those built, and they had to be airborne all the time when they were operating on an Apollo mission. So they could this was before the Deep Space Network, so they could communicate. Yes?
What happened to Apollo 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Oh, those were all unmanned. Yeah, 6, out of those, 4 and 6 were the only ones that actually went into space. They were unmanned, so they were heavily instrumented, and they were testing them to man rating before they sent the crew of Apollo 7. So this is the 3rd command module to actually enter into space and carry people. So here they go into orbit. Oh, wrong people. Well, nearly the same. The crew of Apollo 7 returned looking scruffy, and there they are.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, mission accomplished. So that's Mercury astronaut who flew Sigma 7, which was the 5th launch into space. That's Wally Schirra. He went up on this mission. He had a congestion problem. He had a cold that developed into some, it caused some problems for him. He was irritable on the flight. This was when they returned from space. They had to wear their helmets. After this mission, they decided they don't need to wear their helmets. It's a safe return. So he refused to put his helmet on because he wanted to be able to blow his nose during re-entry. Kind of crazy. His refusal to put his helmet on cost him his career with NASA. When he came back, all he could do to make money is do ActiFed commercials. And, I don't know if any of you saw those, where he'd say, he'd walk in front of a capsule and talk about ActiFed, and he goes, "Take it from me, I'm Wally Schirra, I ought to know." So, somewhere I have that on the VHS. He doesn't look too happy, but I guess the photographer said, "Come on guys, look alive." And there you go. Now those are some smiles, but those aren't real smiles until you see this next picture. I give that 6 G's, that's about an 8 G smile. 1, 2, 3, 4 times 2.5. Okay, this one is about 14 G's. Okay, this is Walter Cunningham. No, that's Don Eisel, Walter Cunningham, who went up with them. So there's their mission. That's their command module, the actual Apollo 7 command module, being assembled. And when they launched, what they tested was the ability to pull away from the booster and do what they call a transposition maneuver, fancy NASA name for a U-turn, and then come back. They had to go away 16 feet, flip around and come back and dock with this little thing here, and using the sighting system here, the alignment tool that they use, an optical. It's not an optical device, it's just parallax. So if you look at this right, you don't see it. You don't see what happens is everything lines up. So, and then you simulate docking. There would be a lunar module in here, but it's absent, of course. What they did is they put some structure here to add to the rigidity of this skirt on top of the booster. What's different about this mission than the subsequent missions, just looking at this picture, what do you see that strikes you? It's about these panels. The SLA panels, space launch, spacecraft, SLA.
They don't appear to be symmetrically deployed.
One of them was hanging close, this one.
Yeah.
Spacecraft launch vehicle adapter, that's what it is. This is Apollo 8 mission picture. Yeah, what happened is, originally it was engineered to just open up like a flower and stay together. Because one of them hung up, Wally Schirra refused to dock with it. He said, it's risky, I don't want to have a problem with us up here, so we're just going to can that part of the mission. So he didn't do his docking maneuver. Other than that, their mission was a great success, except they were like mutineers. The other two started behaving badly. Wally Schirra was full of himself. He had a textbook mission on Sigma 7 as a Mercury astronaut. He flew the best mission. He landed the closest to the recovery team. He did everything by the book, had excellent results, good fuel reserves, good everything. So now he was a god, and he had a complex. What happened was he got mouthy with mission control on many occasions. If you look at the transcripts, he was constantly bickering. And pretty soon the other guys are doing the same thing. They're copping an attitude. When they landed, they were all done, gone. No more flights. So this is Apollo 8. Interestingly, this picture on Apollo 8 shows something that's substituted for the lunar module, and I'll tell you what that is. They call it the test article, and that's what it looks like. Basically, it's something that simulates the inertial characteristics and the structural characteristics of a lunar module. It weighs the same, behaves the same in terms of its center of mass and the way it fits into the SLA section of the space launch vehicle. What they did this for is because they didn't have one ready to go. Grumman didn't have one. They were a little bit behind schedule. So it wasn't so much that they were behind schedule. These guys were in a hurry. NASA, America, was in a hurry to get to the moon first. We wanted to reach the moon first, not necessarily land on it. So Apollo 8, which was supposed to be a low Earth orbit mission, became a lunar trip. Very risky move, and they only had 3 months to prepare for this. It was one of those, heck, let's just do it. Yeah. And so the lunar test article was built and put inside here so that they can see what it feels like to take that simulated lunar module to the moon. And then they came back after 10 orbits around the moon. So naturally, they sent the two astronauts that get along the best and perform the best as a team, the crew of Apollo, Gemini 7, which was a 14-day mission. And rookie astronaut Bill Anders went as command module pilot. So they took these pictures because it was the first time we went around the moon. They read from the book of Genesis, and they saw an Earthrise and came home. The next mission was Apollo 9. 9 was an interesting mission. They didn't go all the way to the moon, and they had a lunar module to test. But to save cost and make it a little bit less risky, they took it up and gave it a shakedown test in Earth orbit. So here's Jim McDivitt, who went as commander, and Dave Scott and Rusty Schweickert. And they did everything in low Earth orbit. It was the first time the lunar module was tested. There's your rocket engine right there. And one's like it on the command module. That's Dave Scott taking a picture of, he had a camera in his hand, and he's taking pictures of Rusty Schweickert, who's doing some spacewalking. Now, Rusty Schweickert will tell you that he's the luckiest astronaut alive, or ever, because he was able to take some time off and have a mindful moment in space that he owned. That NASA didn't tell him what to do, or there was no timeline forcing him to do anything. What happened was the Hasselblad camera failed to function. And Dave Scott said, hey Rusty, just hang out for a while. I'm going to try to fix this camera. So Rusty stopped what he was doing and he just flew in space with a tether. For 7 minutes, he enjoyed marveling at planet Earth and not being bothered by anybody. So he kind of, that's an eternity. For, every minute costs us taxpayers a lot of money. So the only other person who really had a chance to do that was maybe Gene Cernan. He stopped for 3 seconds on his way up the lunar ladder and stopped and looked around. Just to say to himself, this is it. My last time I'm ever going to be here. This was my home for a few days. And he wanted to ponder that. And of course, Alan Shepard, what can I say? He hit a golf ball. He had 2 golf balls. And, but that was all planned.
In 7 minutes, you probably travel several hundred miles over the surface of the Earth.
Oh yeah, easily. So Apollo 10 is these 3 characters. This is the other man who made 2 trips to the moon. Out of 24 astronauts who went to the moon, see, it takes 3 to go to the moon each time, and we made 9 trips to the moon total. 6 of them we had landings. So how do we have only 24 astronauts that ever went to the moon? That's 3 less than what makes 3 times 9, 27. That's because 3 of them had repeat trips. These 2 went twice. Both of them on this mission, and then later on, commanders of Apollo 16 and 17. Tom Stafford went up on this mission, and his next mission was the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975, where he shook hands with Alexei Leonov. First time in space that Russians and Americans greeted each other, and in the height of the Cold War. So this crew also happens to be the ones so far in human history who have traveled the fastest. On their way back from the moon, they were clocking close to 25,000 miles per hour, which is the fastest humans have ever traveled, living humans. There is a human being that's traveling faster than that as we speak. Anybody know who it is? I'll give you a clue. He discovered the planet, or dwarf planet, Pluto. Clyde Tombaugh. His ashes are on the New Horizons spacecraft. He's going about 35,000 miles an hour. Yeah, he's moving at a pretty good clip. Here they are doing some recovery training on a barge. Here they're being cute. And the mission was called, Snoopy and Charlie Brown were the 2 spacecraft. Snoopy was the lunar module, and the idea was, we're going to go close to the moon, we're not going to land, and we're just going to snoop around, sniff it out. And it was a reconnaissance flight. It was a dress rehearsal for the Apollo 11 landing. So they did pretty much everything the Apollo 9 crew did in Earth orbit, they did it in lunar orbit. And then they came back. Now, to keep them from landing on the moon, what they did is they added ballast to the spacecraft, the lunar module, and that ballast replaced the fuel on the ascent stage so that they couldn't possibly come home if they landed. They knew that. And that's what kept them from saying, oh, heck, let's just land. We're this close, let's do it. Mission control, the powers that be, didn't trust them not to have a lapse of judgment and disobey orders. It could happen. Now, the temptation is so strong, they did that. If you ask Alan Shepard, so would you have done what you were told if NASA would have made a decision for you to abort? Because he almost had to abort. He was real close to landing, they had some problems, and he's waiting for a decision, and finally the decision was, okay, we'll go for landing. And a minute later, he's on the surface. When you asked him that, his answer was always, you'll never know. So there he is, rubbing Snoopy's nose for good luck. Commander Tom Stafford. As of this flight, you still see they don't have the orange stripes on the knee or on the elbows. The orange stripe was added on Apollo, I want to say 15, when they decided to distinguish the commander and put the orange stripes on him. So there he is now, he's still alive. And he did the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And these patches were worn by Americans this way. The Russians wore theirs upside down, like that. And you can see that in this picture. Soyuz Apollo, they call it, but rightfully so. And their flag doesn't look like this anymore. It has the same color as ours, red, white, and blue. And of course, we're about to start another Cold War, I think, unfortunately. I don't think we will. We're not that stupid. Here's Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong, the late Neil Armstrong. I got to tell you, when I got the news that he passed away, Chabot called me and said, "Hey, we're going to get hit with the press," and because I, probably know more about the Apollo program than those guys there now, they asked me to come in. By the time I got there, I was riding my motorcycle. My helmet was just full of tears. It was just drenched in my tears. I was really sad when this happened. To me, he's like William Shatner. Men like that don't die. So I don't think he died. I think he's on the moon right now walking around. But to get to where he got to, he did a lot to get there. Many small steps for that giant leap. And he was an X-15 pilot. If you know anything about the history of these planes, I have a whole program where I talk about that aircraft. It's not an airplane or a spacecraft. It's kind of it's a test vehicle to test all kinds of concepts. For example, the first time the use of reaction control systems were right there. You can see those are the yaw jets. When you're in space, your wings are useless. You don't need wings. That's why the space shuttle was it was awesome, but at the same time, very stupid idea. Taking wings into space is dumb. You don't need wings in space. A parachute, it packs nice and tight. That's what we're going back to. It's cheaper and it's safer. And we didn't have any Apollo accidents in space or in flight. So, Senator John Glenn, Dave Scott, they flew Gemini 8 together. And he proved what a great commander he is, because Gemini 8 had a stuck reaction control jet, and they started spinning. When they were docked to the Agena spacecraft, which was a target vehicle that was sent up separately, and it was the first rendezvous and docking in space. These are maneuvers we had to perfect for a lunar orbit rendezvous method of going to the moon. And that's all of this Mercury, Gemini was, learning the trade of how to go to space and how to go to the moon. So when he disconnected from the Agena spacecraft, he thought it was a problem with the Agena. Well, they had less mass. Now the same rockets that are stuck are spinning them even faster. It nearly killed them. What he did is he figured out what was going on. He switched to a manual override and was able to null it out and save the crew. They aborted the mission and came home early because they spent too much rocket fuel. It's kind of like a leaky fuel tank. You don't have much left. So they hurried and hightailed it home from that mission. Of the Gemini missions, that was the one that was off target the most because they had a hard time planning for accuracy. So there was an improvised plan. There he is in his Apollo spacesuit. Now this is a good picture because he's being trained for an ejection seat. This is because he got to fly on this lunar lander test vehicle called LLRV, Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. Lunar Lander Research Vehicle, LLRV. And it was a disaster, and I've got slides to show that. There he is doing a rehearsal of how to deploy an antenna. Even that first step, there he is. That's Neil Armstrong's foot simulating that first step on the moon. It was all planned to that detail. He knew what he was going to say before he went to the moon. And of course, these guys are test pilots and scientists. Well, not scientists, engineers mostly, and aviators. So they had to learn the science of geology. So they were trained in geology and had to go on these field trips and learn how to use hand lenses and recognize the different types of rock. And one other reason they picked him to be the first man on the moon is because he was an expert in flying helicopters. He had a lot of time on. So before they sent him up, though, they got him to retire from the Navy. He was a young man when he retired from the Navy. He had his whole life ahead of him. Why did they make him get out of the Navy and become a NASA employee before he went up? Any idea?
They wanted a civilian to be the first person.
Yeah, they wanted to be able to say the first civilian in space was an American. Yeah, but that's cheating. He was already in the Navy.
Yeah.
You know, take someone who's never been in the service. I mean, I was available, and they didn't ask me. There he is flying a NASA Bell 47. He flew. That's a Gemini spacesuit right there, and that's the LLRB, nicknamed the Flying Bedstead. What they did is they put a turbofan engine on a fixed mount, meaning it's not gimbaled. You can't vector the thrust of this engine. And then its idle speed was such that it would cancel 4/5 of Earth's gravity pulling it down. So if it free fall at idle speed, it would feel like it's falling down with 1/6 lunar gravitational acceleration. So divide Earth's 9.8 meters per second squared by 6, and that's the rate of descent if you cut the engine. Pretending to cut this engine meant idle speed was still quite a bit of thrust. And then they use these reaction control rockets, like you have, to steer the thing, because that's how it's steered on the lunar module. So you can see a cluster of those rockets right here. And those are the cryogenic fuels, excuse me, not the cryogenics, the hypergolic fuels that they use for the lunar module and the command module. So here it is in flight. I have a picture of one of these that's like 1,500 feet up over Dryden. It's crazy. I would be really scared to fly that. Very unstable. And that's Neil Armstrong, who almost crashed and killed himself on this. He had to eject. And that's actually Neil. And this thing popped open about here, and he landed here. So he went to his office. Buzz Aldrin met up with him and said, "Hey, I heard you had to eject." He goes, "Yeah." And he was just looking through his filing cabinet, going about his business. An hour or two later after that. These guys have nerves of steel. 3 other Apollo astronauts had to eject from these things, and they canceled using them. It was to simulate a lunar landing, and they thought, forget it. Well, I just thought this was an interesting picture. He's in Iceland fishing. And this is something he used to tell his kids. Buzz Aldrin, second man to walk on the moon. He's going to be on the USS Hornet on July 26th. It's called Splashdown 45, 45th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing. So if you want to go see him, I think for non-members of the ship, it's $30 admission, and it's $20 for members. And I'm going to be there. There they are in a Q&A session somewhere. And there's their command module pilot. So the first of the 2 Dusty Dozen. I took a long time to get there, didn't I? Sorry. Give you some background. Here they are on this Airstream trailer module. That trailer was to keep them in quarantine. First time we had people come back from a foreign world. And they took that whole thing to Honolulu on this deck of the aircraft carrier. The Hornet on the hangar deck. They took it out of the hangar deck and lowered it on a crane, on a flatbed trailer, and took it to the airport and put it in the back of a C-141 Starlifter. And from there they flew straight to Houston and took it and docked it to an apartment that they had prepared for him for quarantine. The crew of 3, along with a flight surgeon, who was to be sacrificed if we had to incinerate these guys for whatever germs they brought back. He probably got paid a little extra. They lived in what they called a menagerie for 21 days in that quarantine. So like in a prison, they had a huge pane of glass, and they sat behind the glass and visited with family every day. But they had to stay on the other side of the glass until they were cleared. This is something they do in Russia now at Baikonur. before launch. They have a sectioned off place where there's glass separating them from the outside world so they don't go up sick. And it had to be torture to be looking at this cake after, I'm telling you. They came right out of the command module pilot inside this. They treated them like asbestos, right? And, you know, he of course went on to do great things with his life. Dancing with the stars. Okay, so Apollo 12, which was the next one. This was a precision landing. The next two people to walk on the moon, Commander Pete Conrad, also recognizable from his gap tooth, and Alan Bean. And Alan Bean wasn't even supposed to go to the moon. Pete Conrad picked him because they're friends. He went up to Alan Bean somewhere else in the astronaut office and said, "Hey, you want to go on a trip to the moon with me?" And well, that'd be nice, but no one's asking. He goes, "Well, I'm going to see if I can get you to go with me." What do you say? That'd be great. And he ended up going, just like that. It's who you know. And this is Jim Irwin, the command module pilot. So what did they do that was so special? They did a perfect landing on the moon. They were supposed to land real close to the Surveyor 3 aircraft, which was a, space probe, a lunar probe that went there 2 years before. And its job was to tell us if the surface is quicksand and it's going to sink or not. And of course it wasn't. And from the report of Surveyor 3, we knew that, you know, the surface is pretty stable. And they landed a mere 600 feet away. That's pretty darn good navigation. In fact, as they're descending, Alan Bean is calling it out to Charlie. He says, to Pete Conrad, he says, "I see it, I see it." He says that twice. And he's talking about the Surveyor 3. So they came up to it, just a 600-foot walk, and that's Pete Conrad taking the camera lens off of it and bringing it back to Earth. And on it they found some germs that had survived in space. First they thought they're lunar germs. They found out, no, they're Earth-born germs that survived the vacuum and extreme temperatures of space. And
For how long period of time?
2 years. Yeah. Oh, you'd be surprised. Did you watch Cosmos, the new one?
Tardigrades.
Tardigrades.
Yeah.
Those are like,
I want to come back as one of those. Yeah, that would be cool. Now, he's also the shortest guy. Pete Conrad was a very short astronaut, and he told one of the engineers in NASA that one of his friends was an engineer, so I got to figure out what to say when I step on the moon. I mean, Neil said, "One small step for man." What am I going to say? I know. I'm going to say, that was a small step for Neil, but a big one for me, because he's short. And the engineer said, you don't have the goods to say that. I wager you $500. That's a lot of money. A $500 bet. You're not going to say that. Well, we all know from history, he said it, and he collected that money. Collected that bet when he came home. He made $500. Alan Bean, in his days now, is an artist. He does some beautiful paintings of the moon, and he uses some interesting tools. NASA let him keep one of the galoshes that he got to walk on the moon with. They also let him keep his hammer that he used to chip away rocks, and he uses those items to texture his paintings. So after he paints, he puts a bunch of imprints of those devices on the paintings. And then NASA also gave him a patch that he actually wore on the moon. And he was about to put it through the laundry to clean it up because it had a lot of lunar dust on it. And he stopped himself. He said, "Wait a minute. I know what I'm going to do with this patch." He actually, with a scalpel, cuts it in little ribbons. Did you know this, Linda? He cuts it in little ribbons and puts it in every painting he does. He puts a little bit something from the moon in every painting. There's lunar dust in all his paintings. And smart guy, huh? And these are some of his artwork. And you can see the textures.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's from his boot. I would love to have one of these paintings. Isn't that something? So, what's wrong with this picture? So who is this guy? That's Jim Irwin. In a perfect mission, they'd all three be walking down there. Yeah. So it's called the Fantasy. Conrad, Gordon, and Bean. So the command module just decided to go in the bank with these guys. And that's what the future of our lunar travel is going to be. Everything's going to be autopilot. It's better to have people on the ground doing work. And if we can have the spacecraft fly itself, which we know we can now, we have proven that we have the technology. So Apollo 13, we know what happened to these guys. That's Ken Mattingly, who was grounded because he was exposed to the measles. So they replaced him with Jack Swigert, this guy, the bachelor astronaut. Up until now, all these astronauts had wives. And so he got to go instead. But here they are as a team, talking and discussing. Very serious. He looks like a movie star. Look at this picture. That looks like science fiction. Even looks like a Vulcan. It looks like pointed ears, but that's a real photograph. That's Jim Lovell. And here they are doing an egress training. They have to be able to come out of the docking tunnel, not the hatch, from a submerged, upside-down Apollo spacecraft.
Is he not wearing a helmet?
Well, yeah, he's already out of, yeah, they're in Earth, 1 atmosphere air pressure. And just 6 feet underwater. Yeah, why would you wear a helmet? You're not going to wear a helmet coming out. So what he does, because you come up to the surface, how are you going to breathe? And so to make this not happen, they had these riding buoyancy devices here. And one's asymmetric and small, so always flip it that way and bring it up. Then they put what's called a horse collar, and that's what the frogmen do, the Navy guys. They put this horse collar on to add stability before they open the hatch. Here they are in their bunks on an aircraft carrier during one of their training missions. And they're saying, oh yeah, we got this licked, it's in the bag. Or they're just really tired from training a lot. But little did they know they were going to have that problem. This is an actual photograph taken by one of the crewmen. There's Jack Swigert working with Lovell to make this cartridge work to scrub your CO2. That's a lithium hydroxide canister from the command module. And they had to put it in the lunar module, and you can see the lunar module receives a different cartridge. It was built by Grumman. This is all North American aviation. What did they do after that mission, do you think? Standardize them, so they're interchangeable. So if they have to do this again, they don't have to deal with duct tape and piecing it together. That's Aquarius. That was jettisoned after it was used as a life raft. They used all its consumables. They used its main engine thruster to boost them, not boost them, but give them course corrections on their return to Earth. And this is the damage that they observed on this, on that section of the service module where the oxygen storage was. And then Apollo 14. That's when our first ever into space, so it was 14, not 15, where we started putting orange stripes on them, on the commanders. And that's Shepard with Mitchell, yeah, the one who saw UFOs. That's Edgar Mitchell, really smart guy, very educated. Have you seen pictures of him when he was younger? He's a doppelganger for Tom Cruise when he was young.
It's like Kevin Spacey in that picture.
He does there. Yeah, but when he was younger, he looked just like Tom Cruise. And this is Stuart Russo, the command module pilot. So these are the next pair to walk on the moon right here.
What was the purpose of the orange stripe?
To make it easy to tell who's the commander. It's a badge of honor. You're the commander. It's like captains having fried eggs on their visor of their hat. So that's all that is. And before the lunar module had a rover, they took something like a garden cart, because before that they had to carry things by hand, and so they upped the ante a little bit. They gave them a hot dog cart. And they had to, of course, test it in 1/6 gravity using one of the Vomit Comet flights, so they know how it handles on the moon. And of course, you get 2 golf balls. But then, after that, on what's called the J missions, Apollos 15, 16, and 17, they put the world's most expensive automobile on board. This is the General Motors actually designed these, but Boeing built them. General Motors had the engineering concept, but they didn't build things that are lightweight to go into aircraft and spacecraft. They're not into aerospace. Ford is. So they went to Boeing and said, can you make it work for these guys? This is what we want to put on the moon. And Boeing actually figured out how to build it. And they built 6 of them at a cost of $48 million. 3 got left on the moon. So if you want to make some money, go get one and put it on eBay. The other 3 are in museums. One of them is at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. That's where I saw my first one of these. And each one has something like a 1/4 of a horsepower electric motor drive in it. And that's all they needed. With these, they were able to cover a heck of a lot more ground. There's a page actually out of the maintenance manual for the device. And I have this as a PDF, many pages. So I thought I'd take this one out and put it in. Here's the Earth training analog for that. And these guys had to weigh something 1/6 the weight of their actual PLSS, personal life support system, backpacks, and carry them and pretend they're doing their thing on the moon. So much easier to do this on the ground, isn't it? And there they are in action. Very, very suave haircuts and dapper looking. Those are the 500 EL Hasselblad cameras. The only modification they did to those cameras from the way you and I would purchase them is they built a trigger that was big enough so that you can release the shutter through your space glove. And they also put a very thin pane of glass in front of the negative where they scratch reticules on it. And those little plus signs you see on every picture was to give them some scale of what they're taking pictures of. So they also tested the equipment that they used to pick up things. Why did they use, tools like that? Because it's hard to bend your knees in a pressurized suit. It's also risky if you fall and lose your balance. You could tear your suit. Anything more than a ½ tear could be fatal. One of the astronauts actually cut his glove right here. He didn't even realize it until after he got back in that his glove was cut. But it gave the web of his thumb a really nice hickey, basically, the pressure. But his flesh protected the rest of his body because it plugged the hole.
Do you remember who that was?
I think it was...
Lefty. Actually, his whole hand was...
No, what's his name?
No.
Al Worden, Apollo 14, no, 15, Apollo 15, Al Worden. On his way back from the moon, he had to go outside after trans-Earth injection, when they burned out of lunar orbit and they're coasting toward Earth. He had to go get the film cartridges out of the service module that he used for mapping the moon and bring them into the command module, because the service module gets jettisoned, burns in the atmosphere, and the command module brings all the payload back. So here they are in training. Now they're simulating how to release this little package. Look how tiny this thing folds into to fit into the bag.
Be good for parking.
Is that cool or what? You can take that on BART. Yeah.
For 14 million.
Right. This is where Al Worden had to simulate how to take out the film from the service module. And that's why he wrote a book called Falling to Earth. Because when he went to get his film can and bring it back, he stood on the top of the service module and hooked his feet into the handholds and just stood there like that and stared at the earth as they're coming home. Like he's surfing. And he described that feeling as falling to earth. So that was his thrill. And this is Commander John Young, his second trip to the moon, first time and last time he got to walk on the moon, along with Charlie Duke. This is Ken Mattingly, who had the measles from Apollo 13, went on to be command module of Apollo 16. And they say that at the end of the movie, the Tom Hanks movie, Apollo 13. And this guy is something. I wish, if I were an astronaut, I'd want to relive his life. He did a lot. I just thought you'd get a kick out of the fashion statement.
Yeah, really.
I mean, the size of those collars.
Oh my
The
God.
steward shirts.
Look at the color of these pants, but he doesn't know how funny that looks now.
Those are called pants.
Yeah. Anyway, there they are training with their spacesuits. First they had to learn geology using their vehicles. Then they had to learn how to handle the vehicle while driving in a spacesuit. And at times they have to also do it with their helmets on. And they're doing this in desert conditions. And then they also have to do a dress rehearsal where they did this 7 or 8 times before they actually did it on the moon. That's why it was so easy for them. When they were up there, they'd done this 8 times before. There's a rule called 7-11 in NASA at Johnson Space Center. That means for every task that they do in a pressure suit outside a spacecraft in the vacuum of space, they simulate that in the neutral buoyancy lab an average of 7 to 11 times. Average is 8. The average is 8. But they'll do it as little as 7 times. If you're real good, you'll get it by the 7th time. No less than that. And if you're really bad at it, the most you'll do it is 11 times before they say, maybe you shouldn't do that. We'll let someone else do that. So, a lot of practice. And here they are just chumming it up. These are the plaques that they put on the landing gear of the lunar modules. Every one of them had it. So their signatures and all of that is on there. There he is. John Young. It's just a cool name for an astronaut, you know. And do you know what he did that could have cost him his career in NASA? Before that, he jumped up. Actually, look at this. He's jumping. He took a loop up, and then at the top, he salutes, and his partner, Charlie Duke, took this picture when he was up there, and you can see his shadow's not meeting his foot.
Yeah.
That makes it obvious. And there's a film of this, too, the actual film in black and white. So, do you know this incident? Anybody know the story behind the corned beef sandwich?
Oh, smuggled it aboard.
Yeah, Wally Schirra. See, John Young started his career flying with Gemini, and then he flew the Apollo, 2 trips to the moon, and he flew at least 2 trips on the space shuttle. He's the only astronaut in the history of NASA to fly Gemini, Apollo, and space shuttle. Pretty cool, huh? 3 completely different spacecraft. And what he did is, Wally Schirra, the prankster, Mr. Textbook Perfect, went to a local well-known delicatessen and bought this amazing roast beef, corned beef sandwich and gave it to him just before launch of Gemini 3. And his commander was Gus Grissom, serious guy. Oops. He said, hey, bring this out when it's lunchtime. Split it, give half of it to Gus, he'll love it. And John Young's like, okay, thanks. And so he brings this out, hands half of it to Gus Grissom when they're in orbit, like 3rd orbit around. Gus looks at him and said, are you crazy? He opens the zipper and stuffs it in his pants and zips it shut. He goes, fine, I'll eat mine. He takes a bite out of it. John Young takes 1 bite, pieces of it start flying.
Oh.
And he realized, oh, I'm the idiot. He puts his away too, and he spent like the next half hour cleaning up his mess. When he came back, NASA reprimanded him. They cited him on 16 violations of the code for a roast beef, for a corned beef sandwich. So they have to be in cubes of such dimension. There has to be a binder in there. There has to be a spray coating. You have to put it in your mouth, close your lips, and chew it and swallow it. You don't just open your mouth and take a bite out of anything, because pieces of food fly around and can foul the spacecraft and cause problems. So he got in trouble, but because he was such a good guy and amazing, you know, this could have been a career ender, but it didn't end his career. Wally Shaw had attitude. Nobody likes that. This guy was like, oh, sorry. It's okay. You know what's interesting about John Young? He also was the calmest during the launch of a Saturn V. Everybody's heart rate would race up to about 180 beats. His was right around 70. Pre-launch. And it never went above 120. So that's a frosty guy. Very calm. He's still alive. And you know how Rusty Schweikert wants to keep us safe from asteroids? This guy's pet project is to put solar arrays on the lunar surface to collect 100% of the sun's energy without any atmospheric losses, and then beam it back to Earth and get our energy that way. Yeah, it's expensive though. So, and last but not least, these guys, Apollo 17. First scientist to go into space. Carl Sagan, if you watched Cosmos 35 times in your life, like I did, if you remember, he said, sadly, he was also the last to go into space. No, he said it's sad that the last person they sent to space, to the moon was the first scientist. And anyway, he thought that was offensive to science as an enterprise. Harrison Jack Schmidt, a very lucky guy to get to go. And he was one of the two last of the Dusty Dozen. He's still alive. And anyway, so they went around this amazing thing, orbiting us, took these pictures. It's a real world out there. And this is a picture of me and my adventure on the right. I like to backpack a lot. And so I thought I'd put that next to his and see who's tougher. I'll tell you what, there are times I go backpacking and I go places alone. I take a personal locator beacon now, so I don't have to leave my arm with a bear or, you know, die out there. I mean, I'll get rescued. And I don't like going with friends, and I'll tell you the truth why. I'm a little overweight, I know, it's all muscle, but it's true. My friends say stupid things, the stupidest things, like, dude, you're out of shape. I don't need to hear that. They'll say stuff like, come on, let's find a nicer place. What's nicer than where I want to sit my ass now? So they say things like, you gotta lose weight, or man, you're just too slow, or let's keep going. It takes the fun out of it for me. When I go, I own the experience. It's mine. I'm the commander of the Starship Enterprise. I do whatever I want, and it's great. But then I get lonely sometimes. And I think to myself, what the hell am I doing here? I'm freezing. I could be home with Kathleen watching SVU or something, and I miss my dogs. Oh, I want ice cream, I want steak, I want pizza. And I get whiny and weepy, and then I bring out this friend of mine here. See him? I actually take him backpacking with me. My friends think I'm crazy because these guys spend $100 to save 20 grams off their backpack. My friends do. And this guy weighs exactly 21 grams. He's made of foam. And I bring him out and I think to myself, I don't have to worry about radiation hazard. I have an endless supply of air to breathe. And I can get water from any creek around here and filter it. And I'm not far from home. I'm already home. this is my home, planet Earth. And the only thing I envy the astronauts for is that they don't deal with raccoons and bears. It's not a big problem for me, really. If you manage your food, that's fine. So that's why I think these guys went on the ultimate camping trip. Just finding an ocean to come home to is great. If you've been in the rough seas, sometimes you wonder if you're going to die. These guys would be happy to ride the waves of planet Earth to get home safely. So they were very brave men. One last story. These guys also rode naked, most of them, on the way home. That 3-day coast, they don't talk about that much. They took all their clothes off, at least the guys who walked on the moon. The command module pilot didn't have this problem so much, unless he contaminated himself. The regolith, the lunar dust, is extremely irritating. It hasn't been scoured by any kind of weathering. It's from meteor impact that this dust is created, so it's just shards of very sharp crystalline minerals. And it's like itching powder. Any amount of it gets on your body, drives you nuts. These guys had to be naked because the chafing of their clothes against their own body was driving them crazy. I mean, so they just took their clothes off and just hung loose all the way home. Just let their bodies sit still. And they would only suit up for the re-entry and come home. That's a true story. So they're the Dusty Dozen. That's what I call them now. And that's the end of my talk. So. I don't know if there's time for any questions. Okay.
Why 21 days in quarantine? What's so special about it? Why not twice as long or half as long?
Well, at the time, they knew what they were looking for. I can't speak intelligently about that because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a flight surgeon. But they wanted to make sure that they didn't bring anything that was hazardous to our environment and the human population or planet Earth. So basically, they kept them under a watchful eye of a flight surgeon, and they had to make sure that they didn't contaminate Earth before they were allowed to join the rest of us. And they found out that they came from a very sterile environment. There was absolutely no hazard. In fact, the moon is exactly the same makeup as Earth. So once they determined it's safe, and it took only 21 days to do that. So you travel to England and take a dog with you, they'll quarantine it for 6 months. I want to know why they take that long for a dog. So, you had a question?
Looking forward, and I know that NASA's developing the Orion capsule. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but it just seems to me that for a given amount of money, we can send lots and lots and lots of robotic probes in space and not have to worry about them dying and not have to bring them back. Or we can send a few humans into space on missions that don't have much scientific value.
Actually, I don't agree with that. I think there's plenty of scientific value. We learn a lot about medicine. We learn a lot about so much when we take humans up there. Computers are fast idiots. Humans are just slow, but we're smart. We built computers, and that's the way it is. So, by having a human perspective up there, they also bring back something and share with us. I get entertainment value out of it. I want to send you to Mars and come back and tell me what it was like. So for me, it's worth it. I want to read those books. I want to hear the stories. I want to imagine what it was like for them and how I would feel if I was there. In fact, I'm willing to go to Mars, but not until I turn age 70, because I don't want to die young. And at 70, I don't really think I want to come back to Earth. I've had enough of this place. So I'll be the first to die outside of Earth and be buried on Mars. If they take me, I'll go. I really mean that. I would go.
Why do they do 100% oxygen in the road?
Because of the partial pressures, when you go up to mountains, you know, you don't have a pressurized vessel. Your spacesuit is your spacecraft. So if you're going to go outside that, if they lose cabin pressure, they want to have pure oxygen so that you don't pass out. Because it's all based on your partial pressure. If you remember from chemistry and general gas laws and measuring partial pressure, here's an example. If you want to get the same effect as breathing air at 14.5 psi, which is what 14.69 psi, that's the air we're breathing now, and it's 21% oxygen. So let's say 16 psi and call it 20%. So if you divide 16 by 5, let's say you get like 3.5 psi or 4. To get the same effect as breathing 20% oxygen at 16 psi, you have to breathe 100% oxygen at that reduced pressure to get the same benefit.
Yeah, the reason
They run at 1/3 atmospheric pressure in the capsule while they're in space. And by the way, that comment I made earlier, wrong. I believe the Apollo 1, they were testing at 1.3 atmospheric.
I didn't think it was.
Right. Yeah, I was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
No, they want to put positive pressure in there to also check the pressure in the door. But they do differential pressure tests because inside the cabin, the pressures are the same as what we breathe here on Earth. Those are robust spacecraft that can handle that.
Yeah.
And we can afford to do that.
Yeah.
On airliners, the reason they don't keep it at sea level pressure is because they save a lot of jet fuel if they don't.
You know, there's an actual reason why they want a partial pressure, because it
Space.
has to do with space.
Yeah.
If it was full pressure,
It's hard to
it's
move
hard
it.
So they try to reduce the pressure. So
Yeah, the pressure in a spacesuit is about 3.5 to 5.8 psi.
Yeah.
Anything less than 3.5, you'll die. So the spacesuits, and they have to spend the night in a airlock every time they go outside the space station, because they're going to a reduced pressure spacecraft, which is their spacesuit. They need to get acclimated. It's like working on top of Mount Everest for those guys.
Yeah, they don't want to get
Extremely tiring, and they don't want to get decompression sickness. But coming back in, they don't have a problem. So, yes. You had a question, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Just follow up on the quarantine issue. Were the first 3 the only 3 that were quarantined and
Yeah.
nothing else?
Only the first 3, and the one flight surgeon took a risk and went with them. So, you know, let's say it's a science fiction movie where these guys brought some really bad stuff with them. If we had to incinerate them, so be it. And that flight surgeon would have gone with them. Yeah.
She had a little question, and to entertain her curiosity, she wants to know, is there a planet that has no dust?
It has no dust?
Yeah, that's her question.
You know, I just from the top of my head, I'd have to say it's unlikely in our solar system to have a planet that doesn't have any kind of dust. Because the kind of dust we're talking about here isn't the dust that settles on top of your VCR and you have to wipe it with a feather duster. This is just fine particles of mineral that are caused by impact craters. And so it's just basically lunar soil. And so it's like sand on a beach, except it's not fun to walk on or abrade your skin against it. It hurts. It's sharp. If you look at it under a microscope, you can buy regolith here. Anybody can buy it. It's about $30 a pound. Where do they get it from? It's manufactured here on Earth. Basically, they crush rock and they don't expose it to erosion or any kind of polishing action, and then they'll sell you this crushed stuff. It's like itching powder. It's really nasty stuff. But they use it for doing certain experiments. NASA uses it. So you had a question.
Yeah. Where is the lunar module in relation to the capsule at launch?
At launch, it's sitting right underneath.
Right beneath?
Yes. That's why, yeah, they're both sitting with their docking tunnels facing forward. Right. Forward meaning up.
Okay.
Because when you're flying the spacecraft, forward is up.
Okay.
You're laying on your back. And what happens is the command module has to come out away, once they're in, on their way to the moon, and then turn around and dock and capture and dock with the lunar module and extract it from the booster.
Right.
Once it extracts it from the booster, now you have your spacecraft. You turn around and get ready to get into lunar orbit.
Okay.
And basically they coast like that, dock together all the way to the moon for 3 days.
Okay.
And then they open that hatch, and then 2 of the guys go into the...
Go forward.
Right.
And the retro rocket is
The retro burn they do is with the service module propulsion system thruster. That's the second slide I showed you, that huge bell nozzle at the back. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I often wondered when if any of the flags that were left on the lunar surface are still standing, because when the ascent rocket fired,
Right.
it produced an awful lot of downwash. And I remember seeing, by looking, sometimes they had views looking down, and you could see the flag going like this.
Yeah.
I was wondering if most of them are still standing on that thing there.
It's a good question. I believe they are. Now, when those, when they burn...
Actually, I've heard that a number of them did get knocked down.
One did get knocked down, but the ones that stood, if you went back to look at them now, I don't think you'd see a flag there. I think what you would see directly underneath it would be a pile of white powder.
You think so? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the solar radiation direct without,
Well, I was
atmosphere.
wondering about that.
I think it would just destroy the fabric, and the fabric would just eventually crumble.
Right, yeah.
So I would find a bare aluminum flagpole. Yeah. Yes?
So I was thinking about the guy that fly around in the fellow who didn't get to land. I mean, that must be like the loneliest experience in the world.
They loved it.
You know, that's about as far away as every other human being can be.
Yeah,
quite busy.
there's something fun about that. Why do you think I go on these backpacking trips alone? I treasure my own company.
Michael
really do.
Lewis wrote a very good book about that. It's called Carrying the Fire.
Yeah. Michael Collins did, yeah. Yeah, he did write a book about it. And he basically talks about what that was like. I think he really enjoyed it. I would. Yeah, I like solitude, yes.
Did they use the same vertical assembly building for the space shuttle?
Absolutely. They knew that they were building something for generations. And we're building our Space Launch System rocket in that same building. And there's room to spare. They built it taller than it needed to be for Apollo.
So the Apollo was built vertically and the launch site.
Right. The way we do it here in America, we build them indoors like that. They do it the same in Russia, but they build them horizontally.
Right.
Now, it's cheaper to build horizontally because you don't have the infrastructure. You can't build it vertically. That VAB, the vehicle assembly building, was expensive.
Right.
But, you know, we're getting payback for it. Something I want to tell you, for every dollar we spent on the Apollo program, I think it was Harvard University, the following year after the last mission, they did a study to see how much we got back in return. And was it a good investment? Do you think it was?
Sure.
How much for every buck? Anybody know? 9? 15.
We got 10.
Yeah, it was $15. Now that was about 47 years ago or so, or 46 years ago. No, 44. Excuse me, 44 years ago. What do you think it'd be now? I mean, do you like your smartphone? Yeah, it's $50, $200, maybe $1,000.
I think they call the magazine, could have a magazine called NASA Tech Briefs, which are a little magazine about all the spin-offs.
I think it's the best money we spend, our tax dollars. It's less than 1% of our tax revenue that goes to NASA, but NASA gives us all kinds of stuff back. And we own it, we the people. There's no patent infringement. These pictures, I get them from NASA, and they're free for us to use and share.
Stream of everything going on for free.
I love watching that.
So the,
It's like mundane, like space station tests.
yeah, the weather
It's
satellites.
inspiring, it's educational value, and there are direct benefits to
Yeah,
us.
the weather satellite, the weather satellites is one of the direct benefits, daily ordinary benefits of satellite, of the weather.
Right, I'll take one last question, Linda?
Oh, well, whatever, you may talk to
I don't mind, I'm not in a hurry. You tell me how long it's
Go ahead
going.
and take the next one.
It's more of a, like, it's kind of abstract thing. What do you think the future of NASA is gonna be for Mars?
It's guaranteed, we're going there.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, yeah.
Even with the budget we have now?
We have to go there.
Why?
It doesn't matter what the budget is. We're going not alone. We're gonna work with the Russians, Germans, English, because it's expensive. And we as a species, not as Americans, we need to find another place in case something happens.
Is that revive? Is Mars possible?
You know how the dinosaurs had it coming? It's only a matter of time.
And we're gonna bring it upon ourselves.
Yeah, if there's a future of humanity in space. There's a book by Carl Sagan called The Pale Blue Dot.
Yes.
Have you read that?
No, but I know it's.
Get the audio version because he himself read it.
Oh, nice.
And it's like 4 hours long, the audio version. And sit in front of a fireplace with a cup of something. And it will blow your mind. When you think about what he's talking about, it's real stuff. And he's talking about, hey, we're going to be extinct. We have no choice. 4.5 billion years from now, we're gone. Even if we survive that long. If we want to continue to exist in some form in this universe, we have to be able to travel off this planet. It's inevitable.
I'm going to give you something that you might take a part of it with you on your next hike.
Oh, cool.
This is our thank you,
Oh.
and it glows in the dark. This part you can peel off, but now I know your favorite character is right there.
That's beautiful.
It glows in the dark. So this, and this glow in the dark. With our thanks for your brilliant
thank you so
enjoyment.
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll stick around for a while if you want to talk some more.
Ben has something to say?